Ooh, look. Scrumptious, buttery popcorn. Today, we are going to do a popcorn review of Tomb of the Exodus Pharaoh, What Was Found, and Why We Don't Know About It by Joel Kramer on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Okay, today we are going to do a popcorn review of Tomb of the Exodus Pharaoh, What Was Found, and Why You Don't Know About It. And this was done by Joel Kramer of the YouTube channel Expedition Bible. The video we are about to review has over 500,000 views, and his channel has around 800,000 subscribers. Now, Expedition Bible is a pulpit ministry run by Joel P. Kramer. Kramer is affiliated with the Associates for Biblical Research, and if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you probably realize that can be problematic. Kramer's biography from the ABR website states that Kramer has, quote, a BA in communications, end quote. The ABR website also states that, quote, Joel diligently serves the ABR ministry on the ground in Israel, filming, providing administrative assistance for ABR's dig in Israel, and informing ABR about events happening on the ground in Israel today, end quote. He also teaches archaeology at Shepherd's Theological Seminary, which shows how low and desperate they are. Essentially, Kramer is a guy in an archaeologist costume that has no educational credentials in the field. So, with all that background set up, let's get into the video here, titled Tomb of the Exodus Pharaoh, What Was Found, and Why You Don't Know About It.
I had the excavation report of a tomb in the Valley of the Kings that was excavated over 120 years ago by the French archaeologist Victor Loret. I had to actually get it translated into English so that I could read it. And when I read
Okay. Ted is talking about the excavation report of Victor Loret. Now, if you're an Egyptologist, this excavation report is well known to you. And PhDs in Egyptology are expected to be able to read both French and German, since a lot of Egyptological literature is done in both those languages. So if Kramer here was qualified, he wouldn't have needed a translator. Moreover, the tomb of Amenhotep II is well known, and one didn't necessarily need to go to the original report to get information about it. You could have gone to the Theban Mapping Project or a plethora of other resources, for example, Porter and Moss, to get the same information about the tomb.
it, I thought, why isn't this tomb known? Why isn't this famous?
Because it's not as big a deal as Kramer is making out. Kramer is, throughout this video, going to eisegete personal significance into the tomb. It's not a tomb that's all that great, to be perfectly honest.
And so I got my son, we got on an airplane, we flew from Amman, Jordan, where I live, to Luxor, Egypt. We crossed the Nile River to the Valley of the Kings.
So in 1898, Victor Loret was here excavating at the base of this cliff behind me here. And he saw the chisel marks were coming down and concentrated in the area that he was unburying. He realized he was at the entrance of a tomb, and then he found a funerary statuette in front of this tomb with the name Amenhotep II on it. So by the time he had opened up the entrance to the tomb and he and a co-worker entered into that tomb, he already knew that this was the tomb of Amenhotep II.
Now, regardless of what we might believe about the Exodus Pharaoh, we should hear the story of this discovery and understand what the Bible has to say about it.
Objection, leading the witness. Kramer says, regardless of your view of the Exodus, you need to know what the Bible says about this tomb. He is essentially fronting a bias that the Bible has anything to say at all about this tomb. He has not shown yet that the Bible has any direct connection to this tomb. This is really dishonest. It needs to be called out.
Oh. It's locked.
And of course, when we got there, the one tomb that we had come to explore was closed. When I'd been to the Valley of the Kings before, it was closed. Why is what I consider to be the most important tomb in the Valley of the Kings, why is it closed?
Because nobody cares what you think. Yes, Amenhotep II's tomb is locked. But you could have looked that up online if you had shown an ounce of intelligence when it comes to dealing with Egyptian sites. Many of the lesser tombs in Kings Valley are locked. These tombs are closed because they're not of interest to tourists. They are deemed by conservationists to be fragile or vulnerable, or there's really nothing in them to see. Kramer deems this tomb significant because he believes in an early Exodus date. That's it. But that's not enough for Egyptian authorities to open a tomb. Sure, it's an okay tomb, but it's not one of the more ornate tombs. And it's not one of the tombs that has great historical significance. Plus, it is kind of a fragile tomb. So, the conservationists weigh all these factors when deciding whether or not to open a tomb or put it in the rotation of tombs that are opened. And there are times when tombs are opened for a variety of reasons, but not every tomb is opened at all, just because there's not a lot of reason to do so.
And so I'd lived in the Middle East long enough to know that if there's a lock, then somebody's got a key. And if you can find that somebody or find somebody that knows that somebody, then you can usually barter a deal.
If I can help you to visit this tomb, how much are you going to pay? Because I have to pay to the manager, to the securities, a lot of people to take money.
You tell me.
So we negotiated, agreed to a price where they would let not only my son and I into the tomb, but we could use our camera in there as well. But we only had 30 minutes, so we were in a hurry.
So Kramer bribes his way into the tomb. This is not a situation of opportunity, where a foreigner is being presented with the opportunity to have a tomb opened in exchange for bakshish, which is a monetary token of appreciation. Kramer actively sought out a foreign official in order to bribe them to have the tomb opened. This is a violation of Section 291A of the Israeli Penal Law and is a crime. If you're going to commit an act your country considers to be a crime, you might want to do it off camera. Look, seeking out a foreign official to bribe them is wrong. It's a bad testimony, and it's just kind of stupid. Now, while that may be the way things work in Egypt, why bother when you can get most of the same information you need from Kent Week's Theban Mapping Project? There was no real need to have him enter the tomb, except to videotape himself inside the tomb. So this is more or less he's doing it as a kind of archaeological glamour shot. Moreover, there is a legal way to do what Kramer did. You visit the Assistant Director of Antiquities, whose office is in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, sit in her office, show her all your academic credentials, pay her a small fee as she types out a letter of permission. Okay? That's the right way to do this. However, your chances are a lot less if you're Kramer here, since Kramer has no credentials and is just a guy in a costume.
Here at the now excavated tomb of Amenhotep II, but me and my production assistant David have recreated it for you in 3D, just to kind of give you a feel of what it might have looked like for Leray, the original excavator, as he was going through this tomb for the first time just by the light of a candle.
Oh man, it's hard to see.
After walking and at times crawling through the long tunnel, Leray and his foreman soon came to this deep shaft. Leray included this drawing in his report and wrote, Always descending, we eventually found ourselves at the edge of a deep and wide shaft, which was not to be crossed. It's a wonder with the light of just a single candle that one of them didn't fall in. However, it did slow them down. They had to go back out, get a ladder, bring it back in, put it down.
Okay, today there's a modern wood bridge that crosses the shaft. The recreation is not what you'd see there today. But it also, the fact that they have done this 3D recreation of the tomb, it still then begs the question of why they needed to go in there at all, other than to get the glamour shot.
Lorre wrote that against the back wall, I advanced with a candle, and a dreadful sight. A corpse is there, lying on the boat, all black, hideous, its grimacing face turned towards me and looking at me. I mean, think about how spooky this would be. You're down deep in this tomb, exploring it for the first time. You have only what is being illuminated by a single candle, and what's staring back at you is the face of a mummy.
Okay, this is the two-pillared room. So it was against this wall that they found the mummy that was laying in the boat.
Why is he whispering? It's not as if anyone else is in there other than him. It's just kind of strange that he's whispering in this tomb. But besides that, the mummy here that's strapped to the boat is not a royal burial. Royal burials were not strapped to boats like this. Royal burials were placed in sarcophaguses. This could have been either a looted mummy or a post-burial interment, that is, a commoner who was buried in the tomb.
Wow, this is the six-pillared room.
At the back of the six-pillared room, Lorre descended the stairs leading down to the royal sarcophagus, whose lid had been removed by the looters. Lorre wrote, "Is the open sarcophagus empty? I dare not hope otherwise, for pharaohs have never been found in the necropolis of the Valley of the Kings. All royal mummies have been removed in antiquity and placed in a safe location. I reach the sepulchre with difficulty. I read everywhere outside the name and title of Amenhotep II. I lean over the edge, advancing a candle. Victory! A dark coffin is there at the bottom."
Lorre did indeed find Amenhotep II's mummy in its coffin. While this is unusual for the Valley of the Kings, not completely unprecedented either.
This is the staircase that came down. This is the sarcophagus of Amenhotep II. So Lorre is explaining that when he comes in here, there's broken antiquity all over the floor. And so
There's broken antiquity all over the floor. That's hysterical. I didn't think antiquity could be broken. I think he means broken antiquities. Fair enough, a slip of the tongue. But notice here the wood flooring. This is a tomb that has been prepared for tourists to visit, and probably has been open from time to time. Just in 2025, it's not open to the public. It's not as if this tomb was being hidden from the public. It's just part of the tomb rotation that the Antiquities Authority uses when deciding when tombs are to be open to the public.
So at this point, Lorre doesn't try to open the coffin. He comes back up the stairs into the main chamber. In the six-pillared room, Lorre found funerary statuettes and wrote, "All are in the name Amenhotep II. One of them, however, bears the name of the royal prince, Webensenu." He finds all these funerary statuettes. What the ancient Egyptians believed is that these would do menial tasks, magically serve the deceased in the afterlife. Well, one of these funerary statuettes was inscribed with a different name, the name that would become known as Webensenu. Based on this find alone, Lorre reasoned that this must be the son of Amenhotep II, the royal prince.
No one disputes that Webensenu was a son of Amenhotep II, but that's pretty much where agreement ends.
Lorre wrote, "We move to the chambers on the right. In the first one, upon entering, an incredible sight strikes us. 3 corpses lie side by side at the back. The second corpse in the middle is that of a child about 15 years old. He is naked with his hands placed on the abdomen. The mummy in the middle was that of a young boy between the age of 15 and 11.
Okay, this is where things start to get dicey. Kings Valley 35, which is the numerical designation of the tomb of Amenhotep II, was used as a mummy cache. It was used to store mummies of 15 royal individuals. Now, some people do identify the mummy of the child with Weben-Senu, but that identification is by no means certain, yet it's a pretty good guess.
The head has been shaved except for one spot on the right temple, from which a magnificent lock of black hair emerges. This was the hairstyle of royal princes, and I immediately think of the royal prince Weben-Senu. What was unique about this mummy was the hairstyle. This boy had a shaved head, and then coming out the side was this ponytail, which is known as a Horus or a prince's lock. This was the hairstyle, symbolically, that was worn by the children of the king. In fact, we have in these reliefs the pharaohs that ruled Egypt, some of them, depicted as children, where they're wearing this prince's lock.
It was the hairstyle of young boys in general, not just princes. We also see this in the children of scribes. This particular hairstyle is not exclusive to the children of kings.
This is the room where the boy was found, the boy mummy. The mummy of the boy that's still in this coffin in the room where it was discovered. I'm just in shock here because I was not expecting the mummy to be here. I'd read that he is still in the room here, but inside.
Yeah, the Antiquities Authority tends to reinter the mummies of minors back into the original tombs. They don't do this with kings, but they do this with minors. If you go to the tomb of King Tut, you find something similar there with the body of Tut is still in his tomb. So this is pretty typical of what the Antiquities Authority does.
This coffin is the mummy with a prince's lock that is the most probable mummy to be Weben-Senu.
Laude continued, the royal prince Weben-Senu, this until now unknown son of Amenhotep II, of whom I had noticed a funerary statuette in the great room, and one of whom I was later to find canopic fragments.
This is the passage where they found the canopic jar fragments and lids.
So afterwards, what Laude also found in the tomb was these fragments of what are called canopic jars. And one of them was inscribed with the name Weben-Senu, and also had the saying, king's son of his body. Now, what is a canopic jar? In the mummification process, they removed the organs from the body and they treated them separately, and eventually they were placed in what is called a canopic jar. And then oftentimes the jar was inscribed with the name of the deceased whom these organs belonged to. And so this was slam dunk evidence that Weben-Senu was buried in this tomb, because here we have his organs in this jar inscribed with his name. So the interpretation.
Yeah, and all that is consistent with a child burial within a king's tomb. Again, we find something similar in the child burials in the tomb of King Tut.
Of Laude was very logical and obvious. He identified the mummy of the young boy as the royal prince, the son of Amenhotep II, and that this was his mummy. Now, it's not just Laude's interpretation, but we have the standard work of the royal families in a book called The Complete Royal Families of Ancient Egypt. The entry in this book for Weben-Senu reads, son of Amenhotep II, died as a child and buried with his father in tomb KV 35. Where is probable...
While Dodson's work is very good, he does reflect consensus thinking. As such, it's not primary source evidence, but reflects the general thinking within the field overall. Now, I don't think Kramer should be using Dodson in this way. Kramer may not be wrong here, but it's just not a good use of sources.
So afterwards, he goes to the chamber on the left. He looks in there. He sees 9 coffins that are stacked next to each other in this chamber, and he doesn't try to open them at this point. He looks around some more. He makes his way out of the tomb, and this is the end of his initial exploration of the tomb of Amenhotep II. Later, he comes back into the tomb for the purpose of removing the mummies from their coffins, and of course the most important one is the coffin that he found at the bottom of the royal sarcophagus. When he opens this coffin, then inside is a mummy that's wrapped in a shroud, and on the shroud is written the name Amenhotep II. So there is absolutely no doubt that the mummy that he found in the royal sarcophagus was the mummy of Amenhotep II. So this mummy was taken then and further studied by G. Elliott Smith, and his work was published in the Catalog of the Royal Mummies. And what he found particularly unique about this mummy was that, as he described it, the whole body was covered with what he called tubercles, these boil-like sores. And he didn't know if it was a disease that caused this or if it was something else, but he said, he wrote down, they are certainly unusual. And so unique, actually, that of all the mummies that were found in the Valley of the Kings, the only one that was covered with these boil-like sores was the mummy of Amenhotep II.
Now, Kramer wants to say that these tubercles are the result of the plague of boils that's found in Exodus 9, verses 9 through 11. If we grant for a moment that this was a disease of boils, and that this was the only mummy to have this, we would also have to concede that Amenhotep II would have had this condition just prior to his death. The issue here is going to be that Amenhotep II died in 1401 BC. If we take the Masoretic dating of the early Exodus, which is in 1446 BC, or the Septuagint dating, which is in 1406 BC, this means that the tubercles would have had to take place long after the early Exodus dating. Therefore, these tubercles could not have been the result of the Exodus plague, as they are still tubercles, not the scars from the tubercles that would have been indented in the skin after at least 5 years of healing, not convex to the skin. That's the pathology of boil-like diseases like smallpox, chickenpox, or even acne. Once you heal from the disease, it creates craters in your skin, not distended bumps. Unless you also form cysts, which are usually sporadic and abnormal to the healing process. What Kramer doesn't seem to get is that this is evidence that these boils on Amenhotep II happened years too late, and it is therefore not evidence of the plague of boils in Exodus 9, verses 9 through 11.
This is the room back here where the kings were found in their coffins. And so, I mean, it's amazing that we've been able to get in here.
When he started
Yeah, it's not so special. It's only special to Kramer because he romanticizes about Amenhotep II.
So in antiquity, the tombs in the Valley of the Kings were being looted, and to protect the pharaohs that were buried in their tombs, they were taken from their tombs and put in these caches for their protection. And so this is what Luray found in the tomb of Amenhotep II, is a cache of these other pharaohs in these 9 coffins that had been taken from their original burial tombs into this cache for safekeeping. So interestingly, one of the mummies that was in these coffins was Thutmose IV, and he is the one who is the successor of his father, Amenhotep II, to the throne, the younger brother of Webensenu.
Empty conjecture. We don't know if Thutmose IV was the younger brother of Webensenu. It should also be noted that the mummy of Webensenu did not suffer from the same skin ailment found on the mummy of Amenhotep II. This is clearly evident in the photographs from the body. We know that Thutmose IV was the younger brother of Prince Amenhotep, but we have no idea when Webensenu died and what position he held in the order of succession. So we have no idea if Webensenu was an elder to any other prince. Kramer here is being sloppy about his history.
What Luray found in his discovery and excavation of the tomb of Amenhotep II, now what we need to do is bring the Bible into it and look at the details of what it tells us about the Exodus Pharaoh.
Oh yeah, let's bring the Bible into it, because the Bible can't survive without injecting our own biases into it.
Exodus 12 says the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, including the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne.
So we know from the biblical account that the Exodus Pharaoh, his firstborn, died before he did. And then we know from what was found in the tomb of Amenhotep II that he had a son, Webensenu, who died before he did, because
Yes, Webensenu died before Amenhotep II. But the Passover is about the deaths of the firstborn. We have no evidence that Webensenu was the firstborn of Amenhotep II. And a lot of other kings had their firstborn sons predecease them as well, including Moses III, Amenhotep III, I, and Ramses II.
He was buried in his tomb. Once a king dies, then he's buried in his tomb with his belongings and his treasures, and that tomb is sealed off. Nobody is buried afterwards. And so
that's not exactly true. Once a king is buried, the formal burial of him and his goods is over. But that doesn't prevent others from later on coming in and using the tomb for other purposes. Even for KV 35, it was used for the burial of other kings as a cash tomb. So Kramer contradicts himself here.
we know for certain that Webensenu died before his father because he's buried in his tomb.
I don't doubt that Webensenu was a son of Amenhotep II. However, the inference Kramer is making here is certainly contestable. That is, Webensenu is the firstborn of Amenhotep II, and that he died during the Exodus Passover. That's sterile conjecture, which is so thin on evidence it's not even funny.
And this is an incredible match.
Look, can't you see how things match? You stupid plebes. You'd have to be an idiot not to see it, even though I gave you no solid evidence at all.
Probably, this is the oldest son of Amenhotep II, and therefore the one who would have died in the plague of the firstborn.
Quote, this is the oldest son of Amenhotep II, end quote. Well, that's not been established. How does Kramer know that? First dead doesn't necessarily mean that one was the oldest. All the textual evidence suggests that Webensenu was younger than Prince Amenhotep. Prince Amenhotep was the earliest crown prince of Amenhotep II. Kramer keeps making these goofy connections, but he doesn't know what he's talking about.
When Smith examined the body of Amenhotep II, these, as he called them, tubercles were all over his skin. And in fact, you can see this when you go to the Egyptian Museum and see the mummy of Amenhotep II to this day. You'll see these boil-like sores on his skin. I don't want to make too much of this. We don't know anything for sure, but I also don't want to make too little of it either. Isn't it interesting that if Amenhotep II is the Exodus pharaoh and is the one that Moses stood before and threw the soot up into the air and then the boils broke out, that he's the one that lived through that plague, and Amenhotep II is, of all the kings that have been found, their mummies have been found, his is the one that has boils like sores all over his body.
Isn't it interesting that that's not how pathology works? Okay, first of all, the mummy of Amenhotep II is not in the Egyptian Museum right now. It's been moved to the GEM, the Grand Egyptian Museum. Okay, so it's no longer in the Egyptian Museum. Nevertheless, if someone contracts boils and dies at least a half a decade later, one doesn't retain the pustules years later. Those pustules show signs of healing and form craters and scars in the skin. Anyone who has been through chickenpox or acne knows this. Okay? Kramer is really overplaying his hand here. And by really harping on the idea that Amenhotep II had the sores at the time of his death, that this couldn't have resulted from the Exodus plague of boils. So he's essentially, by doubling down hard on this, he's really showing that Amenhotep II couldn't have contracted these boils at the time of the Exodus. It's a later disease.
When I did a video in the past on the Pharaoh of the Exodus, one of the major complaints was that we shouldn't have a mummy of the Pharaoh of the Exodus because he drowned in the sea crossing and therefore his body would have been lost. There's two reasons in the Bible itself that we should expect to have the mummy of the Pharaoh of the Exodus. The first one, which is the most important, is that the biblical account does not say that the Pharaoh of the Exodus drowned in the sea crossing.
Exodus 14:23 says that the Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea. This included all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen, but it doesn't say Pharaoh himself went into the sea. Exodus 14:28 says, the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen of all the hosts of Pharaoh, and it specifically says that followed them into the sea, not one remained.
And this is typical of how it works with kings. Kings send their armies into the battle. Maybe their armies are defeated, but they themselves are not in the midst fighting the battle themselves. Their lives are too valuable for that.
Okay, that is actually correct. The Pharaoh of the Exodus did not drown in the Sea of Reeds according to the Bible. But he neglects to address that Pharaoh marshaled his chariots from Ramses to attack the Israelites, even though neither Ramses nor Migdol existed at the time of Amenhotep II. So he's correct on one thing, but avoids the obvious implications of what he brings up here.
Similarly, Psalm 136:15 doesn't say the miracle killed, but rather overthrew Pharaoh.
It doesn't say that Pharaoh drowned in the sea crossing. In fact, it implies that really he did not. Even if Pharaoh did die in the sea crossing, we still would expect to have his mummy, because it says in Exodus 14:30 that Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the seashore. They saw the bodies of those who had drowned. And from the Egyptian perspective then, the most important body to recover would have been the body of the Pharaoh. So either way you look at it, you would expect to have a mummy of the Pharaoh of the Exodus.
Yeah, I don't get why Kramer's trying to appease Islamicists and fundamentalists here. Amenhotep II died in 1401 BC. That's at least 5 years after the latest possible date for the early date of the Exodus. So, at least that's the latest possible date according to the Septuagint's 440 in 1 Kings 6:1. Okay? But even if you believe in an early Exodus date, which is bereft of evidence, you still cannot believe that Amenhotep II drowned in the Sea of Reeds, because the dates just don't work. There's too much time between the death of Amenhotep II and an early Exodus dating. It just doesn't work.
We have to talk at least briefly about the biblical date of the Exodus.
Of course, we have to talk about the biblical date of the Exodus, because Kramer is an affiliate with ABR, and that's their shtick. Okay, the primary thing that ABR promotes is an early date of the Exodus, so he's going to just really double down on this hard.
Just going to do this real quick and then move on. 1 Kings 6:1 says that from the Exodus to the time when Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, there were 480 years. We know when Solomon built the temple, 966 BC. How do we know that? Well, I did a whole video on that, using that as an example, and you can watch that after you get done watching this one. But we know that that was 966 BC. You just do the simple math with the 480 years, and we have a solid date for the Exodus from the Bible, which is 1446 BC.
Okay, this is so painful because it is so stupid. Kramer is taking the literalist ABR hardline here. He doesn't get that 1 Kings 6:1 is a temple dedication inscription and all that it implies. He also doesn't get that Amenhotep II didn't come to the throne until 1425 BC, which is long after 1446. And no modern chronologist doubts that anymore.
Chronology is not as well understood, and it is not agreed upon even by secular Egyptologists.
Yep, this is very typical Kramer modus operandi. You throw in an unreasonable doubt that no one accepts anymore and declare, could be.
Some follow what is called the high chronology. Some follow the low chronology. The dates of the reign of Amenhotep II and the biblical date fit very, very well with the high chronology.
Okay, no one accepts, no chronologist at any rate, accepts the high chronology anymore. But even if we did accept the high chronology, The High Chronology pegs the accession date of Amenhotep II to 1439 BC, years after what he would suggest is the early date of the Exodus. But this is what ABR has to do. They have to distort the dates to get the results they want. So they say, okay, we're going to accept the High Chronology, but it doesn't quite reach, but it's close enough that we can just stretch it back till it works. And they do this everywhere. You know, they falsely connect Senu with the firstborn of Amenhotep II. They'll also falsely connect Senenmut with Moses. And they falsely draw the accession of Amenhotep II from the high date of 1439 to where it works for their 1446 date. It's dishonest, and it shows that, for them, history is subservient to their ideology. They don't really care about history. They care about the ideology. History is just an inconvenience that gets in the way.
Understanding that the dates when these kings reigned are known within about 50 years. You could add 50 years or minus 50 years to them.
Quote, dates are known within 50 years, end quote. That's not true for the New Kingdom, okay? Especially not the later New Kingdom. There's a difference between scientific error and crazy doubt, okay? Given the latest techniques in chronology that have been developed over the last decade, the error in dating has been reduced to, in some cases, plus or minus 5 years. But Kramer here is appealing to crazy doubt. The difference between scientific error and crazy doubt can be explained by the following analogy. A Marine Corps sharpshooter with a precision sniper rifle with inconsistencies of the machining of the scope and the barreling of the rifle can achieve a circle of shots on a target within about an inch. Okay? That inch represents scientific error, the accumulation of little errors in the rifling and the aiming of this sharpshooter expert. Now, give that same rifle to a drunk teenager, and you are lucky if he hits the side of a barn. That's crazy doubt. Because Joel Kramer has no knowledge at all about chronology, when he refers to, quote, dates are known within 50 years, end quote, he is referring to crazy doubt, because he needs crazy doubt to keep his beliefs alive.
The point that I want to make before moving on is simply this, that if we take the biblical date for the Exodus, and whether we follow the high chronology or the low chronology, whether we add 50 years or take 50 years from it, we're still looking for the Exodus Pharaoh in the 18th dynasty of Egypt. The 17th dynasty is way too early. The 19th dynasty is over 200 years too late. So the Exodus Pharaoh is somewhere in the 18th dynasty.
That only works if you are absolutely certain that 1 Kings 6:1 has to be read literally. But then you fall into the problem that if you read 1 Kings 6:1 literally, then Exodus 1:11 cannot be read literally, because the cities of Ramses and Pithom did not predate the 19th dynasty. Basically, Kramer has to pick and choose which texts he reads literally and which ones he doesn't. And he has to arbitrarily choose 1 Kings 6:1 as the text he reads literally. Essentially, Kramer is appealing to a kind of dating that is simply not possible. It's not possible for the Exodus with Amenhotep II to date to 1446 BC. It doesn't work historically. It just doesn't work even biblically.
We have here in these discoveries what Laude calls in his report the strange chronological series of these discoveries, because they follow the lineage of the royal family of the 18th dynasty. Before he found the tomb of Amenhotep II, previously in that same excavation season, he had discovered and excavated the tomb of Thutmose III, the father of Amenhotep II.
What is unique about Thutmose III was the length of his reign. He reigned for 54 years.
I don't get why Kramer is highlighting this. This is a fairly typical high chronology dating. and yet it shows the death of Tutmosis III in 1436, a decade after the early Exodus date. Is he trying to defeat his own position here?
Exodus chapter 2 says that Pharaoh tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh to Midian. During that long period, the king of Egypt died, finally allowing Moses to return to Egypt.
Eisegesis. Exodus 2:23 does not say that the king of Egypt died, allowing Moses to return to Egypt. The text only says that the king of Egypt died. This is irresponsible and incompetent handling of the biblical text, and it's shameful. What he's doing is essentially injecting his interpretation into the text instead of reading strictly from the text. This guy should not be teaching at any Christian seminary. It's just crazy that he's teaching at Shepherd's, because this is, wow, this is poor handling of the biblical text.
This long period, when Moses was in Midian, we are told in Acts 7:30, ended after 40 years.
40 years is an idiom for an indefinite long period of time. It's found in the biblical texts and in extra biblical texts. The fact Kramer doesn't know this shows his pig ignorance.
And then he comes back, and at this point, then the next Pharaoh is reigning, and this is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. So in order for this to work, then we need the predecessor of the Exodus Pharaoh to have a very long reign of over 40 years. And the only Pharaoh in the 18th dynasty that reigned for more than 40 years is Thutmose III. He reigned for 54 years, and he is the father of Amenhotep II. Therefore, of all the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, the only pharaoh that passes this requirement from the Bible is Amenhotep II, because his father reigned for over 40 years.
Why? That assertion is not found in the biblical text. There is absolutely no warrant from the Bible that the predecessor of the Exodus Pharaoh had to reign 40 years. It's not there in any way, shape, or form. I have challenged dozens of early daters to show this from the Bible, and none of them have proven the claims. This is an early Exodus dating myth, and it's totally crazy that early Exodus daters are still doubling down on this. It's stupid, unbiblical eisegesis, and Kramer should be ashamed of himself for continuing to promote this idea.
I mean, how much more obvious could it be from what Laude found in the tomb of Amenhotep II?
I don't know. Maybe evidence that didn't require empty conjecture or biblical eisegesis. That would be a really good start.
He found the mummy of Amenhotep II that had a shroud wrapped around it, which had Amenhotep II's name on it. He found this mummy that was covered with these boil-like sores.
Oh, wow. Laude found the mummy of Amenhotep II with sores that just so happened to have nothing to do with the Exodus. But that's a thing.
The son of Amenhotep II, Webensenu, he found his name inscribed on a funerary statuette. He found his name inscribed on a canopic jar, and he found the mummy of a boy with the prince's lock. I mean, we're talking about, why is this not the most famous tomb from the Valley of the Kings? It should be.
Because Kramer is making connections that no reasonable person in the field of Egyptology would make. Kramer thinks this should be more famous than it is because he's making tendentious causal links. He makes it abundantly clear through this that he is not an Egyptologist, because none of this actually connects.
Yet it's closed, and people don't know about it, and...
Again, the Egyptian Antiquities Authority does not open tombs based upon the beliefs of a minority of American fundamentalists.
And then when you look it up today on the internet or wherever you're doing your research, then the more modern takes on this are all arguing against these positions that were well established and understood in the past. They're the ones that the evidence bears witness to.
Just to be clear, no Egyptologist who handled this material thought Amenhotep II was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Okay? He is trying to make a claim here that all these Egyptologists and archaeologists in the past believed Amenhotep II was the pharaoh of the Exodus. He's making an appeal to tradition. However, Kramer is superimposing his beliefs upon the archaeologists of the past without warrant.
And yet now all these arguments, it's a focus of these arguments. Oh, 480 years doesn't really mean 480 years. Oh, the length of this reign isn't really the length of just one pharaoh's reign, but of more than one pharaoh's reign. Oh, this mummy that was found in Amenhotep II's tomb isn't really the son of Amenhotep II, but this other pharaoh, and on and on and on. Why?
This muddled mess is just Kramer ad hocing for his position. If he has specific defenses to the critiques against him, he really needs to specify what those are. But instead, he just sort of rambles on here.
Why is the focus of all this argument on Amenhotep II? The simple answer to that is it's because Amenhotep II holds the evidence for being the pharaoh of the Exodus.
Okay, this is fixation bias. No one outside of American Christian fundamentalism holds that Amenhotep II is the pharaoh of the Exodus. The reason why we keep coming back to Amenhotep II has nothing to do with the evidence, but because fundamentalists yell louder and longer that Amenhotep II is pharaoh of the Exodus. And that's really not an overstatement. If fundamentalists stop pretending, quote, what I want for Christmas is Amenhotep II, end quote, the who was the pharaoh of the Exodus debate would disappear overnight. And we can really thank James Orr for starting this mess in 1906. Okay, we are going to stop the video here. By this point, you should pretty much understand what Kramer is trying to get at. He is an ideologue who is promoting a particular interpretation of the Bible, no matter what the evidence actually says. And he is not adverse to reading his own views into the evidence or into the biblical text. In conclusion, this is not a video to be trusted. Kramer is not a subject matter expert, and what he says is not reliable. He's not educated in the field of Egyptology or archaeology. He is essentially a guy in a costume. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting and informative. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.